Hi, fourth grade, it's Miss Ranis, and we're continuing our lesson on nonfiction books. And today we're going to be reading a nonfiction book, and it is called The Rough-Faced Girl. It's by Raffi Martin and illustrated by David Shannon. And if you're like, boy, David Shannon, that sounds so familiar, you're right. He did all the No David books. This is kind of a departure from David Shannon. His illustrations are usually really funny and really humorous. This is a much more serious book for David. So I'm excited to see what you think of the illustrations. So this is, yep, it's a nonfiction book. And you're thinking, that does not look like a nonfiction book at all. Well, if you remember, we were talking about folklore and fairy tales and how that's in the nonfiction section. And if you remember on our chart, on our Dewey Decimal Chart, that's in the 300s. So if you look really closely here, it's 398.2. And of course, then it goes into 08. And that means that it would be in the 398.2 section, but then it even goes further for Native American, because this is going to be a Native American tale. And then, of course, it's the first three letters of the author's last name. So it is M-A-R because it's Raffi Martin who wrote it. This was actually a Golden Sword nominated book and winner a long time ago in the 90s. And it's still a great book today. So since it is a folklore fairy tale, because it's about Native American, it is in the nonfiction section. And it's going to sound familiar. This story is going to sound a bit familiar to you. And I'm going to see if you can figure it out at the very end. So let's go ahead and read our story. Once long ago, there was a village by the shores of Lake Ontario. Off from the other wigwams of this village stood one great huge wigwam. Painted on its sides were pictures of the sun, moon, stars, plants, trees, and animals. And inside this wigwam there was said to live a very great, rich, powerful, and supposedly handsome invisible being. However, no one could see him except his sister, who lived there too. Many women wanted to marry the invisible being, but his sister said, "Only the one who can see him can marry him." Now, in this village, there lived a poor man who had 3 daughters. The 2 older daughters were cruel and hard-hearted, and they made their youngest sister sit by the fire and feed the flames. When the burning branches popped, the sparks fell on her. In time, her hands became burnt and scarred. Her arms, too, became rough and scarred. Even her face was marked by the fire, and her beautiful long black hair hung ragged and charred. And those 2 older sisters laughed at her, saying, "Ha, you're ugly, you rough-faced girl." And they made her life very lonely and miserable indeed. One day, those 2 older sisters went to their father and said, "Father, give us some necklaces. Give us some new buckskin dresses. Give us some pretty beaded moccasins. We're going to marry the invisible being." So their father gave them these things. Dressed in their finest, the 2 girls marched through the village. All the people pointed and stared. "Look at those beautiful girls," they said. "Surely they shall marry the invisible being." And if those 2 girls were proud and hard-hearted before, they were even prouder now. They walked haughtily through the village. At last they came to the wigwam of the invisible being. And there was his sister waiting. "Why have you come?" she asked. "We want to marry the invisible being," they answered. "That's why we're here." "If you want to marry my brother," she replied, "you've had to have seen him. Tell me, have you seen the invisible being?" "Of course we have," they insisted. "Can't you see how pretty we are? Can't you see the beautiful clothes we wear? Oh, yes. Anyone can tell that we've truly seen the invisible being." "All right," she said quietly. "If you think you have seen him, then tell me, What is his bow made of? And suddenly her voice was as swift as lightning and as strong as thunder. His bow? They stammered in surprise. His bow. Oh, we know. But turning desperately to one another, they whispered, what shall we say? What shall we say? Let's say it's the oak tree. So they said, it is the great oak tree. No, said the sister of the invisible being, no. Oh, she saw at once how they had lied. Tell me, she continued, if you think you've seen my brother, the invisible being, then what is the runner of his sled made of? Oh, we know, cried the two sisters. But whispering feverishly again, they wondered, what should we say? What shall we say? Let's say it is the green willow branch. No, said the sister when she heard. No, you have not seen my brother. Now go home. Oh, just test us fairly, they exclaimed. We've seen him. Just don't ask us all those silly questions. All right, said the sister of the invisible being. Come with me. And then she took them back to the great wigwam and set them in the seats furthest from the entrance, the guest seats. Soon they heard footsteps coming along the path. Then something stepped inside. Though they heard breathing, the two sisters still couldn't see a thing. Suddenly a great bow and a beaded quiver of arrows appeared in the air and were set down. But though those two girls sat there, their eyes wide all through the night, they never saw a thing more. And in the morning, they had to go home ashamed. The next day, the rough-faced girl went to her father and said, Father, may I please have some beads? May I please have a new buckskin dress and some pretty moccasins? I'm going to marry the invisible being, for wherever I look, I see his face. But her father sighed. Daughter, he said, I'm sorry. I have no beads left for you, only some little broken shells. I have no buckskin dress, and as for moccasins, all I have left are my old, worn and cracked and stretched out pair from last year, and they're much too big. But she said, whatever you can spare, I can use. So he gave her these things. Then she found dried reeds, and taking the little broken shell, she strung a necklace. She stripped birch bark from the dead trees and made a cap, a dress, and leggings. Then with a sharp piece of bone, she carved into the bark pictures of the sun, moon, stars, plants, trees, and animals. She went down to the lake shore and soaked the moccasins in water until they grew soft. Then she molded them to her feet. But they were still too big, and they flapped like duck's feet as she walked. Then all of the people came out of their wigwams. They pointed and stared. Look at that ugly girl, they laughed. Look at her strange clothes. Hey, go home, you ugly girl. You'll never marry the invisible being. But the rough-faced girl had faith in herself, and she had courage. She didn't turn back. She just kept walking right through the village. And as she walked, she saw the great beauty of the earth and the sky spreading before her. And truly she alone of all in the village saw in those things the sweet yet awesome face of the invisible being. Can you see the invisible being? And if you can, there's his nose, there's his mouth, his chin, his eyebrows, his eyes, his hair. At last she came to the lakeshore just as the sun was sinking behind the hills, and the many stars came glittering out like a fiery veil in the darkening sky overhead. And there, standing by the water's edge, was the sister of the invisible being, waiting. Now, the sister of the invisible being was a wise woman. When she looked at you, she just didn't see your face or your hair or your clothes, no. When she looked at you, she would look you right in the eye, and she could see all the way down to your heart. And she could tell if you had a good, kind heart or a cold, hard, and cruel one. And when she looked at the rough-faced girl, she saw at once that, though her skin was scarred, her hair burnt, and her clothes strange, she had a beautiful, kind heart. And so she welcomed her dearly, saying, "Ah, my sister, why have you come?" And the rough-faced girl replied, "I've come to marry the invisible being." "Ah," said the sister very gently now, "if you want to marry him, you would have to have seen him. Tell me, have you seen my brother, the invisible being?" And the rough-faced girl said, "Yes." "All right then," said the sister, "if you have seen him, tell me, what is his bow made of?" And the rough-faced girl said, "His bow? Why, it is the great curve of the rainbow." "Ah!" exclaimed the sister in excitement. "Tell me," she asked, "if you have seen my brother, the invisible being, what is the runner of his sled made of?" And the rough-faced girl, looking up into the night sky, said, "The runner of a sled? Why, it is the spirit road, the Milky Way of stars that spreads across the sky." "Ah!" cried the sister in wonder and delight. "You have seen him. Come with me." And taking the rough-faced girl by the hand, she led her back to the great wigwam and sat her in the seat next to the entrance, the wife's seat. Then they heard footsteps coming along the path, closer and closer. The entrance flap of the wigwam lifted up, and in stepped the invisible being. And when he saw her sitting there, he said, "Ah, at last we have been found out." Then, smiling kindly, he added, "And oh, my sister, but she is beautiful." And his sister said, "Yes." The sister of the invisible being then gave the rough-faced girl the finest of buckskin robes and a necklace of perfect shells. "Now bathe in the lake," she said, "and dress in these." So the rough-faced girl bathed in the waters of the lake. Suddenly all the scars vanished from her body, her skin grew smooth again, and her beautiful black hair grew in long and glossy as a raven's wing. Now anyone could see that she was indeed beautiful, but the invisible being and his sister had seen that from the start. Then at last the rough-faced girl and the invisible being were married. They lived together in great gladness and were never parted. The end. So, boys and girls, what fairy tale is this from or based on? If you said Cinderella, you are correct. This is the Algonquin tribe's version of Cinderella. So you can see how similar they are, and there are some differences in there too. And that's the great thing about fairy tales, and that is why they're in the nonfiction section. Each culture has their own fairy tale and their own version of a Cinderella story, and this happens to be the Algonquin tribe's version of Cinderella. And so today, since we were talking about nonfiction, and we've been doing a lot with nonfiction, I thought we'd have a little fun with nonfiction today. And you will get to create your own fairy tale with a twist. And you're going to list a whole bunch of parts of speech, which is noun, verbs, and adjectives. And if you don't know, we'll explain it here. A noun is a person, place, or thing. Example, the brown dog barks. So the noun is dog. A verb tells what the noun is doing. The brown dog barks, so of course barks is the verb. And the adjective describes a noun. The brown dog barks, and of course the adjective is brown. So you're going to come up with your own list. Do not look on the back yet. You got to fill this in first. And then, oh yeah, it'll tell you what to fill in, and you're going to create your own fairy tale. So boys and girls, I hope you have fun, and I'll see you next week. Bye.